have this incredible passion. I have to create this, even if it doesn't make any sense, even if I can't convince anybody else that this is a good idea, I have to do this. But I also understand what it's like to be an investor, because I'm an investor in startups and early stage companies. And I'm an advisor as a CFO to a lot of early stage companies. So I have a number of different perspectives on that. St. Olaf College is what brought me from Western Illinois. I grew up just south of Moline. That's what St. Olaf is what brought me to Minnesota. Public accounting, which is where I learned that I am unemployable. I worked for a tax department at an unnamed large firm in Minneapolis, and they took attendance. And so out of principle, I was never, ever there on time, ever. And at some point, they really were trying to, my boss was really trying to communicate that you should quit before we fire you, but I didn't understand that. And the way he communicated that was, we did a self-evaluation as part of a performance review. So I had to rate myself on 1 to 5 in a bunch of different categories. And I knew I was on thin ice, so I wasn't going to give myself any 4s or 5s, but I gave myself 2s and 3s. He wrote in 0s in every single category. And I was 22. I was just crushed. This is my career, and I've already failed. So ultimately, I didn't quit because I didn't understand what he was trying to say, and so they fired me in March from the tax department of the CPA firm. Just that gives you an idea about how much they didn't want me around. So I spent several years in an environment where I was miserable, frustrated, bored, and essentially unemployable. And life got a lot better when I left public accounting and I started CFO Insights. I started providing high-level CFO services to very small businesses that they were frustrated. They were incredibly frustrated with their CPA firm because the value propositions didn't match up. They asked their CPA to prepare a chart of accounts and set up their accounting system. What do CPAs do for a living? They prepare tax returns. If you ask them to design a chart of accounts and an accounting system, what will they design? A system that makes it incredibly easy to prepare what? A tax return. What good is a tax return when you're running a business? It's 6 to 9 months out of date, and it's not even useful information. The reason we have accounting systems is to provide meaningful and timely management information with which to make accurate and timely management decisions. But most tax accountants can't do that. They don't know how to design an accounting system to provide you that kind of information. So all of a sudden I was having fun. I was working with early stage companies, and I was helping them with a big piece of the puzzle that they didn't have. In a 10-year period from 96 to 2006, I was a CFO for over 100 different entities in all kinds of different industries, and I got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was an incredible education. And this was my value proposition. Within every business, and with every one of you that has a startup or is going to have one, this applies to you. Within every business, there's 2 businesses. The first is identifying, selling, and servicing your customers' needs. That's what we spend a lot of time focusing on. But the second is the business of running a business. And in my experience, statistics tell us that 80 to 90% of new ventures fail in the first 5 years. The failure point is almost always in the business of running a business. Very few people that are passionate and are willing are crazy enough to take the risks of starting something, quitting their job and starting a business, very few of those people aren't able to find customers and satisfy them with whatever their product or service is. But many of them don't build a business, build the business of running the business, the systems to scale that. And what's the reward for being successful? What's the reward for doing good work? The opportunity to do more good work. And time after time, I worked with entrepreneurs who started something and they were very successful at finding new customers, and they were very successful at getting more work. But at some point, they realized that if I get any more work, this is going to kill me. They didn't build systems to support growth or to scale. And so now they and maybe their small team are doing it on 80, 90, 100-hour work weeks. And pretty soon, subconsciously, they start to resent the customers. If I get one more person that wants me to do something for them, I can't handle that. And so you start to sabotage your own success. And if you hire me, I'm free. Because you're probably spending 30 or 40 hours a week on the business of running the business, and the truth is you suck at it. It's not your strength. And you're not spending that time with customers, identifying potential potential growth opportunities. What you're doing is you're spending your time in the wrong area. I can probably do what you're doing in 30 or 40 hours a week in 10 hours a week. And if I charge you $100 a week, if you can't go out and in that 30 hours that I've freed up for you, if you can't go out and create at least $3,000 a week of new revenue at roughly a 50% gross profit margin, then you don't have a very good business. And so in the right business, I shouldn't cost you anything. And I never had any problem finding clients. I would have lunch with entrepreneurs. I explained this over lunch, and almost inevitably they'd say, "What are you doing this afternoon?" Because I don't have anybody like this on my team, and I need that help. 2003, I was the CFO for Lawrence Meats. That was one of my CFO clients from 1999 until 2003. Learned the specialty meat industry pretty well. I kind of had a vision for a grass-fed beef company. I really had a sense that there was going to be that the demand for that was really going to grow, and so started really thinking about it in 2002. I write business plans. I create businesses for other people. So I wrote a 50-page business plan, and we started operations in September of 2003. Now, I wrote an analytically driven business plan, which is what everyone tells you to write. Lots of stuff in there. And I had a really interesting experience in the process that I was forming the vision and trying to put the details, like I'm going to describe the process that I used to do that today. I went out and found a couple of small-scale family farms that were raising grass-fed beef. No antibiotics, no hormones, no grain, no feedlots, no chemicals, and I bought a box of frozen meat from each of them. And I brought those boxes home, and my wife and I started eating the first box, and it was the most incredible beef we'd ever eaten. I'd stopped eating beef prior to that because I got tired of having indigestion, I got tired of the bad eating experience, and it took about 6 weeks to eat that box of meat up, and while I was eating that meat, I wrote this incredible analytical-driven business plan. And then we finished that box out, and I started on the next box. Well, that night, I threw the whole 50-page business plan in the garbage because that box was the awfulest, toughest, rankest, gamiest. It was inedible. The whole kitchen smelled like a feedlot when we just from cooking it, much less eating. I didn't understand anything I didn't understand the chemistry of grass-fed beef. I didn't understand why that happened. All I knew is that full family farms in Minnesota with no antibiotics, no hormones, no grain, no feedlots, no chemicals, and yet the eating experience couldn't have been more different. Well, I don't have a business if 1 week I'm going to deliver you the best beef you've ever eaten, and the next week it's terrible. So I threw the business plan away, and I just thought, well, that's not going to work. And the next morning I woke up early, and you can look back at those pivotal points in your life where you think that was a decision moment where everything changed. And I woke up in the morning, I had this thought, what if I could figure out how to make sure that every animal that we killed was like that first one? And so I wrote a new business plan. It was just one sentence. And it was this: what do we have to do from the moment of conception to the plate to deliver the most incredible eating experience possible? My original plan was intellectually driven. I was going to sell heart-healthy beef to the health-conscious consumers. TwinCities is a great place to sell health food. We got more health food stores per capita than any place in the Bay Area. But that was all analytics. And when I threw that away, and I went back to exactly what Lean Startup is all about, continuous improvement. I started with one question. And I started with the understanding that I don't know anything about this. So this was my value proposition. My revised value proposition. Instead of saying, I'm going to sell you heart-healthy beef that's got 400 milligrams of omega-3 fat per serving, I'm going to sell it in these co-ops, and I'm going to sell it for this much. This is my value proposition. I'm going to sell you beef that I don't know how to produce to you, the customer, who don't know why you should eat it, at a price twice the price of the commodity beef in the grocery store. that isn't going to win any business plan competitions. But that was what I started with. And it was, and that's why this is important, it was an intuitive-driven process, not an analytical-driven process. 50 pages versus one sentence. And that, answering that question became the driving force passion in my life for the next 12 years. And the success that we had with Thousand Hills was based entirely because I was continuously improving and continuously trying to answer that question. What can I do better this week, this month, this year to make sure that the eating experience is even better? All right, by 2014, it was a $12+ million in revenue company. I took on a partner in 2011 who had a lot of experience in the food industry, and we finalized our plan for him to buy me out, which we had started on a couple of years before in April of this year. Now, unfortunately, just to make sure that you don't think I'm all that smart, our sales in 2015 are probably going to be $5 million. So I did not time this right, and I did not sell it for what it would have been worth if I would have sold it in 2014. And the reason for that is all because of the value proposition. I did two things that I wouldn't do again. One is that I spent way too much money trying to validate the idea and trying to figure out how to produce this kind of beef. But second of all, I built a value proposition for the end consumer, for the eaters. I didn't build a value proposition for the gatekeepers. And that worked fine when I was selling to individual co-ops and one gatekeeper only represented the shelves on one store. But when I started selling to national accounts that had 100, 200, 500, 800 locations, one person controlled whether or not I was on the shelves in those stores. And those people were predominantly old white men, old white meat guys, who absolutely thought that grass-fed beef was a fraud. They would tell me to my face, I cannot believe my customers are stupid enough to buy your product. But I got to have it because they're the affluent customers in my store and I got to keep them happy. But the moment that a competitor came to them with an inferior product in terms of the eating experience at a cheaper price, they were quick to switch. So I misread that. I built an incredible value proposition. My customers were loyal, and my kind of customers would have paid whatever they had to pay to buy this beef if it was on the shelf. But that one person can keep them from being able to vote with their dollars and do that. So it was a good lesson learned. So I'm back to my CFO practice, what I call Act 2. I'm an active CFO for 4 to 5 startup early stage companies, and at this point I can afford to be kind of picky. I only do projects where the goal of the organization is something that resonates with me. I consider myself a social entrepreneur. I believe in using a for-profit business model to solve a social problem. I started Thousand Hills because I wanted to fundamentally change the way we raise cattle in this country. I grew up with cattle in a feedlot. I understand how unhealthy and holistic that system is. So in addition to that, I've always got my eyes open for the right kind of investments for one of our family investment LLCs to take a minority stake in those companies that I'm the CFO for. And Jim and Stephen and I are starting to think about how do we do this lean startup. I first was exposed to the Lean Startup, the book, through the Akara Institute at the U of M through their Institute of Sustainability. Fred Rose, who directs that, asked me to be, I was a guest lecturer at one of their classes in January. And I was sitting in this class and he was teaching about lean startup and had stuff all over the walls, and then I read the book and realized I've actually been doing this for 20 years. I just didn't know I didn't know anybody else had formalized it. So what I'm really excited about is taking 3 or 4 startups a month and walking through the process that I've used with all my consulting clients as well as Thousand Hills to really create something that has the highest likelihood of being successful. And ultimately, the deliverables when I do this are, you need to have a lot of clarity about what the vision is, what the mission is, what your values are, your value proposition, and your executive summary, and that really sets you up well to make a credible pitch for a seed round investment. All right. before we can really dig into lean startup methodology, I like to back up a step and look at the innovation curve. How many of you have seen this before? Are you familiar with this? Good. You should be. You really need to understand this. Because the key here is the amount of time it takes to go from 0 to 1% market share or market adoption of any particular innovation is the same time it takes to go from 1% to 10%, to 10% to 50, and from 50 to 90. That's incredibly important to understand. Now, if you're in a startup, we're all living right in here. And it's helpful to just chart that out in the big picture. This is the same graph, but it's smartphone adoption rate. So in 2001, nobody had a smartphone. By 2005, 1% had a smartphone. By 2008, 10%. By 2012, 50% did. So whether or not you're, those of us that can invest in a company or start a company that ultimately turns into something that's widely adopted, that's obviously the goal that we're chasing. But it helps to understand when we talk about growth, when we talk about lean startup for startups, we're living in this hoping to get to 1% adoption rate. All right. Except for Stephen, you can't answer this. Which one of these is the lean startup methodology? A, B, or C?
I'll take A.
Yep. Okay, I hear some A's. Anybody else? C? Somebody saying C? Okay.
I say B.
Okay. Stephen?
B. I would say all of the above, actually.
That's the right answer. That's exactly right. B are the words that I've always used to describe the process of going from a vision to scale. And what I mean by scale is this 10 to 50%. C is this is the way that Steve Blank teaches it. You have an idea, you build a prototype, you take that product to the market, you measure the customer satisfaction with it. Most products don't survive this. Well, they're not good enough. There's no product fit. So you go back to a new idea and start over. And then you learn from that and go back and change the build, change the product. This is an iterative process. This is the way that I have taught this and used this myself for the last 20 years. I'm particularly, I spend a lot of time on the vision piece because I found that the biggest killer of startup enterprises is a lack of clarity of the vision and a lack of alignment for the key shareholders. So what I've done when I started to understand the lean startup, I realized for me the lean startup methodology is it's a more elegant way of describing the validation stage in my concept. So once you start with the vision, and we'll talk about that, and once that's clarified, then you move on to the validation stage, and I really like the lean startup methodology for determining the validation. And there's a fundamental difference between the way vision works in founder-driven startups versus corporate organizations. So let's talk about the vision a little bit. Anybody recall what the proverb says about vision? Without the vision, if there is no vision, what? Anybody know that?
The people perish.
The people perish. What's the source of a vision? Where does vision come from? Where does a founder who has a great idea for a new technology, where does that come from?
You usually want to solve a problem, a social problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oftentimes it's just a frustration.
Mm-hmm.
I've found that with my clients, very often there's a vision that's some external. It's something external. It's just I don't know where I don't know how to describe where I got the idea to start a grass-fed beef business. It was just sort of there, and it was incredibly compelling. I had to do this. So I think in many cases the source is external from us. Now, however your belief system works with that, I don't really care. But typically, the vision comes to, well, I'll ask it as a question. Do you think it's more likely for the vision to come to an individual or to a committee? Individual, I would say. All right. Now, the other thing that's really important to understand about vision is a lot of people think they have a vision, and all they've really done is backed into something from a desire to take advantage of current market conditions. So if current market conditions value tech startups highly, that's actually the vision and the goal. The goal is to make money because the current environment values tech startups highly, right? So let's back into an idea. Do you understand how? I call that a manufactured vision. We backed into it. That's very different than what I call an intuitive vision. When you run across somebody who has a profound idea, a game-changing, world-changing idea, and sometimes they can't even articulate it yet because it's still too early, that's intuitive. As an investor, I'm much more intrigued with an intuitive process than a manufactured process. Because when things are difficult, they can't pivot. Because the underlying motivation for them is to make money. It's not to solve a problem. And so as an investor, I've learned to be able to tell the difference between those two things. All right? There's a pragmatic vision. This is going to make me rich versus I have to do this at any cost. Even if, one of my great quotes that a couple months ago, somebody was interviewing Elon Musk and asking him, so what percentage of your PayPal fortune have you invested in Tesla? He said, well, like nearly all, like $32 billion of my $34 billion that I got. And that's so stupid. And he said, the question was, well, what do you think your return on your investment is going to be? He said, probably nothing. But some ideas are so important that they're worth doing even if they don't make any financial sense. Someone has to prove to the rest of the world that we can do electric cars. That is I must do this vision. That's totally different than a pragmatic, as a founder, this is a good return on my investment of time and energy. All right, I define a vision as a mental picture of a future reality that doesn't currently exist in the manifest world. And that's important because it does exist. The moment that someone has a vision in their head, when did the iPhone come into existence? When it was first released to the marketplace? Or when somebody had the idea for it, but it was just an idea? It was real as an idea. Ideas are real. They're just not manifest yet. The whole point of startups is to turn an idea that has merit into manifest reality. Like I said, they're given to individuals, not to committees. A vision is always the starting point for planning. And, very importantly, the person with the vision is the real leader, regardless of the titles. All right, the vision, as we begin to refine the vision, we can start working on a value proposition. And we're starting to transition. This is one of the tasks that I take my clients through when we move from the vision to the validation. What is it? What problem is it that you're going to solve for people? And this is a continual iterative process of redefining this. My initial value proposition was I was going to supply grass-fed beef fresh by the cut where you already shop. And it was very clear based on the research that I'd done that that's what I was going to have to do in order to be successful. And I didn't know if I was going to be successful, but that was the minimum requirements. All right. So, and does anybody know where this comes from? This definition? Does anybody recognize this? I steal everything. Nothing. I have no original ideas. So, who did I steal this one from? Jim Collins. good to great. Jim Collins, and I've never found a better definition of a value proposition. You got to do something that customers cannot live without. But now sometimes they don't know, they're living without it now, and they don't know that they can't live without it. Nobody in the Twin Cities thought they couldn't live without grass-fed beef in 2003. And I was stupid enough to think that I could convince thousands of them to ultimately do that. And it's got to be something that competitors find difficult or impossible to duplicate. All right, as far as I'm concerned, as a leader, you have two responsibilities. Who's the leader, by the way? We just talked about this. I'm going to test you already. Who's the leader?
Person with the vision.
Person with the vision. Totally two things you have to do as a leader. You have to continually clarify and communicate the vision. Everyone, every other stakeholder wants to know what the vision is. And if you don't know, or if you've manufactured it, if it's not really intuitive, passionate, those are hard to pull off. It's not that they don't sometimes happen, but clarify and communicate the vision. And the second one is to make sure you've got alignment among the stakeholders. I'm a third owner and the CFO of a startup called Standard Soil, and we're going to do essentially what I did with Thousand Hills, but on a massive scale. So we're talking. We've got a board of advisors. The CEO is actually from Shell Oil. He's been for the last 15 years. He's run their Game Changers venture fund. So he had to give away. He had to invest at least $10 million a year in game-changing energy technology startups. He's seen every technology that's out there. He's seen it. And of anything he could do, he just retired at 50 last year. And of anything he's seen, the ability to raise grass-fed beef and the way we do that, we can sequester more carbon by the way we raise cattle than he can sequester with his $3 billion investment. And we're not even getting paid to do the carbon. We make our money from selling the cattle. He hasn't found any energy technology that he would rather own or be involved in than grass-fed beef production at a large scale. So we're putting that together. And we just spent the last 10 days with our advisory board on the phone a lot. We've got 2 members of our advisory board who are board members for let's see, how do I describe this? A very liberal environmental/animal welfare group. And I'm pushing to try to figure out if they're really aligned for this. And I don't think they are. And I don't really want their money. They have a lot of money, and it was all teed up. And I'm pushing to make sure I don't want, not having alignment, it is, I'll quote Donald Trump. One of the things that he said recently is that if you want a deal bad enough, you'll get a bad deal. If you want somebody's money, or if you want somebody as a stakeholder bad enough, you will just conveniently ignore whether or not they're really aligned with your passion. As a founder, the biggest mistake you can make is getting stakeholders that you're beholden to that don't really share your passion.
What's your sense, and how do you know that? Is that an intuitive process too?
No, you ask. You talk about it.
Okay.
You talk about it and say.
But they could say anything.
Right. They can say anything, but you just make it clear that I guess the way I ask the question is, if you're going to be a seed round investor in my company, what are your conditions of satisfaction? What are your expectations? And I come up with some theoretical scenarios. What if I have to do this? How are you going to feel? What are you going to? How's that going to rock your boat? All right. Normally, when you're just beginning the validation process, so you have a value proposition, but we have no idea if it works. I had a value proposition. I'm going to bring grass-fed beef, fresh by the cut, where you already shop, to 5 or 6 co-op stores in the Twin Cities. Now, was it going to sell? I have no idea. How do I find out? Well, I have to get a USDA label. I have to buy the cattle. I have to kill them. I have to put them in a package, and I have to get them to the store, put them on the shelf, and then they don't sell. And then so then I have to buy an electric grill, go stand in the store every day and give the meat away, hoping that if people try one bite, they'll be like, that was incredible. Where do I get more of that? And it worked. But I spent every weekend in a grocery store for 6 years, talking to hundreds of people a day and giving away samples, hoping, and it turned out this way, that all it takes is one bite and you're hooked. But I had to validate that. So when you start the validation process, you typically don't have any resources, which is a really good thing. And if you actually had resources at that stage, what happens is you just skip the validation. Because validation is a lot of hard work, and it's tedious. It's like standing in the grocery store, flipping burgers, and giving away pieces of them to thousands of people, and having the same 30-second conversation over and over and over again. Week after week after week after month after year. It is incredibly tempting. Nobody that has the resources actually does validation. And that's why it's a good thing when you're at an early stage if you don't have much for resources. The goal is to be effective with the resources you do have, not efficient. Efficiency is something that you do later after you've validated your value proposition. Efficiency really, I'm going to back up a step here. Where does efficiency really matter on this growth curve?
Growth in the church.
10, yep, exactly. 10% to 90%. Henry Ford owned the auto industry up to 10%. But Alfred Sloan owned it from 10% to 90%. Who was Alfred Sloan? Anybody know? GM. Why? He wasn't innovative. He didn't have a vision. But he absolutely ate Ford's lunch at efficiently getting cars to the masses. Efficiency doesn't matter at this stage. Effectiveness does. We have to effectively determine whether or not our value proposition works. How do we do that? We get our product or service out to a customer to find out what their response is. Now, if you have a vision that you alone can turn into manifest reality, I would say it's maybe not all that significant of an idea or a vision. There's nothing wrong with it. Perfectly fine. But big ideas, big visions typically require a team to turn them into manifest reality. And one of the things the visionary has to do is to try to identify team members. I didn't want another visionary on my team at Thousand Hills. That's only going to be counterproductive. We've already got that covered. I need people who can turn my vision into reality and do that well, but I'm not going to hire other visionaries. All right, so within the validation step, we got ideas, we build something, we take a product to market to test it, we measure the results, we get some data from that, we learn from that experience, and we go back and make it better. That's exactly what I did with Thousand Hills. I took a product to market that wasn't all that great. And I didn't know, when I started, the cattle that are going to produce an incredibly gourmet eating experience look exactly like the cattle that you're going to have to feed it to your dog when they're standing in the pasture. And I didn't understand. Now I know how to tell the difference from them live, but at that time I didn't. I just had to trust that what if I got a whole month's worth of bad ones? Well, then I'm out of business. I'm going to attempt to validate my value proposition, and everybody's going to say this is terrible. So I had to eat some of every animal before I could sell it, just to try to validate that. All right, what do we need to know to implement this lean startup process and validate? What is it we're trying to validate? Not the vision. The value proposition. Now, the vision leads us to a value proposition. And then we have to validate that value proposition before we want to do this at scale. And before we can really ask anybody for money, if you come and ask me for money as an investor, I'm going to say, well, what have you validated? you got to do that on your own. You got to go stand in your own grocery stores and do your own version of cooking burgers. All right, so this is my example. My MVP. Does anybody know what an MVP is? Minimum viable product. All right. I did not know how to have a great eating experience every time. That's what I wanted. That was my vision. So my vision was, what do we have to do from the moment of conception to having that meat on the plate to produce an incredible eating experience every time? That was not my MVP. And I rolled the product out to market years before I actually knew how to do that. So my MVP was, I'm going to give you beef that I will certify has never had any grain, has never had any antibiotics, has never had any added hormones. I know the farm it came from, and it's fresh by the cut where you already shot it. You don't have to buy it frozen. You don't have to buy 100 pounds at a time. You don't have to put a cooler in your basement or in your garage, or a freezer in your garage. You don't have to drive to my farm and pick it up. I'll get it to you this way. That was my MVP, but it might not be all that great. I hope that you're so excited about the fact that it doesn't have antibiotics and hormones and grain that you'll overlook the fact that it's tough as shoe leather and it tastes like, I don't know. So
Is it tough as shoe leather?
not now, but there were certainly some steaks that weren't very good. Absolutely.
And if there are good ones, are you thinking the competition is watching me?
The competition was laughing at me at that point, so I wasn't worried about competition at that point. So what are my minimum requirements to get my MVP to market? I have to know that. I have to figure that out. Well, I had to have USDA inspection. I was already the CFO at the processing plant, so that wasn't too difficult. I had to get a USDA approved label. They'd never approved a 100% grass-fed label claim before. That took some work. I have to have cryovac packaging because that's now fresh by the cut with a long enough shelf life. The way meat was packaged before I started this is you sold them a whole chunk of ribeye, they cut it into steaks and put it on a tray with shrink wrap. Well, the moment they open the package for the ribeye, they have 3 days to sell that whole chunk of ribeye. Well, I can't, my sales are so slow, that doesn't work for me. They would throw away 2/3 of it. They're only going to sell 1 or 2 steaks a day, and you get 8 or 9 steaks out of a whole ribeye. So that was an operational problem I had to solve. Well, the solution is to use cryovac packaging and package it at the USDA processing plant into individual steaks. But there's a problem with that. Those steaks don't bloom. When you buy a steak that's been cut at the grocery store and it's under saran wrap, it's bright red because it's been exposed to oxygen, and the myoglobin in the muscle tissue turns red when it's exposed to oxygen. Mine is packaged so quickly in an airtight package that it's purple, not red. Well, now I got to sell purple meat at twice the price of the prevailing product to customers who don't know why they should want it. But I don't have any choice because I get a 45-day shelf life with cryovac packaging, or a 3-day shelf life with a styrofoam tray. Now, at this point, half the meat sold in grocery stores is in cryovac. And consumers have learned that the purple, not to be turned off by the purple, but I had to make signs. I had to put signs on the shelf, and where the channel strips are, that said, please don't be nervous about our purple. It's not really purple. As soon as you open the package and expose it to air, within 10 minutes it will be bright red. I had to teach the customers that. But that was my MVP. These are all the things that I had to wait to solve later until I actually had a product in the marketplace and I could start doing this iterative process of continual improvement. Carcass utilization. I don't get to buy just one steak from the farmer. I have to buy the whole 1,200-pound animal, even if I can only sell half of that before it has to be frozen. And the moment that it's frozen, I lose 20% of the value and all my profit. So the only way I can make any money is to sell all of it fresh, but I don't know how to do that yet. And right now, I don't care if I don't know how to do that because I'm not doing this at scale. I'm only doing 1 or 2 animals a week. And I just want to see if this value proposition, fresh by the cut where you already shop, even though the meat's purple, even though sometimes it isn't very tender, it isn't very good, is that a good enough value proposition? Is the fact that it's antibiotic-free, hormone-free, and no grain, will that overcome all these things I don't know how to do yet today? And it turned out that it did. But I had to validate that.
So, can you pace yourself now? I want to get to some question and answer.
Yes. Well, how much time do you have left?
Give me 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, not easy. That's fine.
Okay. Well,
All right, so here's the key about an MVP. There's a constant. How many of you know what scope creep is? It's kind of an accounting term, but there's a perpetual desire to put more stuff in the MVP than it needs.
Give me like your 50-page business plan?
Exactly. That's exactly right. It turns out all I really needed to start this thing was one sentence. But I was analyzing it, and I was manufacturing a vision. That's actually, I never really thought about it that way, but that stage was a manufactured vision. And what I got to was this intuitive vision, which only needed one sentence. All right, speed, getting an MVP to market, speed trumps perfection, and it trumps the Swiss Army knife syndrome. And that is the desire to, this product should do everything, it should solve every problem possible.
That's the term, start fast, fail fast?
Right, start fast, fail fast, and the MVP, the question you should constantly be asking is not what else can we make this do, but what can we eliminate from this that isn't really, we don't really need to test or validate. All right, no value proposition survives its first contact with customers. It's another great principle. No matter how well you've thought this out, when you go to validation and take your value proposition and put it in the marketplace, it will have to get modified. All right. The question I'm going to ask you as an investor is, do you have a product or a service that's ready to scale? Because the only real way I'm going to get a return on my investment is if the answer to that question is yes. And the second I'm going to ask is, how much capital do you need to scale? And if you don't know, I'm absolutely not interested. All right, so I got a few slides here, and mostly I've talked about the startup experience through my founder's lens, and now I'm going to talk about it from an investor point of view. There's 4 things that I need to validate as an investor if I'm looking at a startup. The first thing is, well, you can read it. Business viability, and this has to do with 4 things. Have you validated the size of the market? Have you validated your product fit? In other words, have you taken your product to market and gone through several iterations of tweaking it so that your customers really like it? Have you gotten to the point where you have customers that cannot live without this product? And will they pay for it? Because if you're going to convince me that they can't live without it, but they won't pay for it, then they don't find it highly valuable. Because anything that we find highly valuable, we're willing to pay for as a consumer. So you've got to validate that. Does this product solve a problem, solve a need? Will people pay for it? Is there enough margin? Is there a decent margin? And the gross margin, that was one of the major problems with Thousand Hills. I started with a 25% gross profit margin. By 2014, I was at 9%. It's really hard to grow a company 40%. And we were on the 5,000 list for roughly 1,700 for 3 years in a row. It's hard to grow 40% a year on a 9% gross profit business. That is not much fun. So I want to know that. And I want to understand the quality of the team. Because I'm going to make an evaluation about how well do I believe that you've really validated this. What I'm really looking to determine, does the founder and the team, are they capable of quickly changing the product if we learn later on that we still don't have the product fit right? All right, I'm interested in a return on my investment. Is the goal here to generate a lot of revenue but no profit and grow as fast as we can? And this would be a typical VC play, where there's a lot of VC people that they're offended if you talk to them about profit or free cash flow. So why would you want that? We want to get as much revenue as we can, and then we'll sell this to somebody else. Okay, that's fine, but that's not the kind of businesses that I invest in. I want a business that is actually is capable of generating free cash flow. It may be highly valuable and be sold to another company in the years, but I'm not interested in investing in a company that the only hope for an ROI is to sell to somebody else. The greater fool theory. That's the greater fool concept of ROI. The only way that I get paid is if I can find a greater fool than I was for investing in the sucker in the first place and sell it to him. That's not particularly attractive to me. We need to talk about an exit strategy. How are we going to ultimately exit from the business? We're going to talk about risk, because what I know from my own experience is that you're probably wrong about nearly everything in your value proposition. You're probably wrong about at least parts of the validation. So this is really interesting. Sometimes when you invest in a company, you're investing in the leader and their team. And that investment shows that you have confidence that they are able to deal with a bad idea. And sometimes you invest in the idea. So here's the question. If the idea fails, if we learn through further validation, we don't actually have a viable value proposition. What do? Do we fire the leader? And then I take over the company and I hire somebody else because the idea is really good, but the leadership team was unable to execute on it? Or do I say, well, I've got a great team of leaders, let's find a different idea? This is a critical question that comes into play about control. Because when you sell, when you take on investment capital, one of the questions is, when we end up in this situation, when the idea fails, who gets to make this decision? And as an advisor to you, as your CFO, I'm going to want to try to make sure that you get to make this decision, not your investors. As an investor, I'm coming at it from the opposite perspective. All right. The valuation is a key part that we're going to have to talk about. What's this thing worth today? We're going to have to assign some kind of a value to it, and that's going to be entirely based on how good a job you've done at the validation process. How much evidence do you have that your value proposition is valid? And I'm going to push back on that, and I'm going to see if I can poke some holes in that. Depending on where you get your financing, this is how I would kind of assign this. If you have a vision and you have it, and you can't validate it because let's say you need $1 million to build your MVP. You don't have $1 million, so you're going to have to raise seed round money. You're going to have to raise $1 million here to build your MVP just to see if it works. If it doesn't work, you close the business. The seed round investors write off their entire investment, and you're done. Okay, what are they investing in? The idea or the likelihood that the team can eventually iterate to a viable value proposition. I would propose that seed round investors are investing in the team, not the idea. Does that help you? If you were going to sit down with a seed round investor, what are you going to emphasize? Are you going to emphasize the fact that this idea is for sure going to work? Or are you going to emphasize my team and I are capable of figuring out some version of this general idea that will work? Let's say it only takes you $10,000 to build an MVP and to validate it, and you do that with your own money, and you're through validation now, but you need $10 million to go from 1% to 10% market share. Well, you're going to have to give up a lot less the company now because you've already validated. And at this point, the idea is much more mature, and so an investor is investing, I would say 50% of the value is in the idea itself, and 50% is in the team's ability to continue to iterate and go through the lean startup process in order to really get something that will scale. And by the time you've figured out and you're at 10% market share, it's the idea. At this point, if there's any failure, the team's going to get fired, and the investors are going to hire a new round of leaders to continue to scale this up. If you want more info, you can get a hold of me, phone, email. I have a LinkedIn page. I'd be happy to visit with you more about walking your startup through the process that I just described. And now we'll do questions.
Okay, good. So, so I'm going to take the approach of you came here with some expectations about Lean Startup, and the question is, are we meeting your expectations, or was this helpful in doing that? And if it wasn't, what part of Lean Startup that you're knowledgeable about would you like to ask some questions, or how it might apply to your particular startup or venture, and see if we can help you out. So, floor is open. Dale.
One of my initial questions, first of all, I would say this is one of the best presentations I've seen from within the trenches on lean and bootstrapping and all that. At one point, you made the comparison behind, I forgot exactly what you called it, but I'm just going to call it the inspired vision versus the manufactured vision.
Right. That's the words I use.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's not, so it's not a comparison to suggest that, are you suggesting that one's better than the other, or is it just two different types?
There's two different types.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is that as an investor, I'm predisposed towards the intuitive vision versus a manufactured vision.
Okay.
Because in a manufactured vision, as the
Because I'm just curious under the idea that, okay, if we accept the idea that there really is no original thought, I mean, there's a brand new startup and then there's the disruptive startup.
Oh, yeah.
So is the disruptive more based on a manufactured? I mean, can you be truly inspired if you're simply disruptive?
I think that Stephen could address this better, but I think that the manufactured concept is would be more common in a corporate environment, where you say, we think there's an opportunity here to do this. Let's put some boundaries around. Let's do some brainstorming around this boundary opportunity area, and then let's apply this iterative lean startup process to figure out how to bring those ideas and test them. And that's perfectly valid. I've spent my career working with founders and visionaries, and my experience with them is that it just feels very different, because it's almost and some of you were nodding when I said, you have this idea and you just, I have to do this. I just have to do this. And having been in that position, I know what that feels like. And it's different than this would be a great idea and there's a market opportunity for this.
This is why I do meetups.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on that too. How, as an investor, how do you know the difference?
Oh, it's easy to tell the difference.
What's some criteria? I was thinking about Imation with 3M when they did that. I would have questions.
Well, but that doesn't mean that it's not viable. Both of them can be viable.
Yeah.
It's just, as an investor, I know what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I know what I'm comfortable with. I know what I'm used to.
So what are you looking at? Just
You
as
just-
a common investor.
You just ask questions. You just look at that, and if someone has that kind of passion,
So passion's one.
well, it all comes down to what motivates you as a founder and what are you committed to. If you're committed to turning your vision into reality, you'll pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot, and you'll keep pivoting until you get it to reality. If your primary motivation is to figure out how to win the BC lottery, then what you're really trying to create, see, here's the difference. I'm leery of startups where the value proposition is directed to the investor. That's different than a value proposition that's directed to a customer.
Okay, I'm going to orchestrate the questions. You have one.
You mentioned what you called the greater fool theory, or building a business with the objective of selling it.
That's not necessarily bad. It's just.
Well, what do you mean exactly by the greater fool theory? Is when I hear that, what I assume, like, there are plenty of businesses out there that they may have built themselves to be sold, but if Google makes $20 billion a quarter or more, who cares if they pay a premium?
Oh, Yeah, that's not the point.
What is the point?
The point there is, I don't want to be an investor in a business that's the only way to generate an ROI, because this business is unable to generate positive cash flow at the scale that it's at. And the only way that it can generate positive cash flow is if somebody buys it.
So it's preference.
It's preference.
Okay.
There's no value judgment. It's just,
well, what you called it made me assume that you had like a stance that it was a bad way to go.
No,
so I was
but
it happens more often than not.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just that it doesn't meet his passion.
That's fine.
Right.
I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
The most valuable thing I learned today, thank you so much, is that I'm in A round and not seed. And I'm thrilled to death. I am just thrilled to death. I can't tell you. But as the founder and CEO of the company, I'm getting pressure from two directions. We have clients who can't live without our product, and the pressure is, do we find more clients, or do we insert the product into huge platforms? And I'm conflicted.
good.
So what is your product?
I'm glad they're conflicted, because
So what is your product, Mia, so we can all relate to it?
Well, the product is a screening and development survey that measures how customer-centric someone is. So,
so if you're hiring CSRs,
exactly. It
I
can-
want to know that.
And
I want
it
to know
can
that.
be,
before I hire.
retail, food and beverage, travel and hospitality. My own background's in travel and hospitality, and then after I got my credentials in academics and psychology, I worked for large leadership consulting firms like Korn Ferry and Right Management. And my company, in some ways, blends the two. But what I had to build was, when I worked at the Whitney Hotel in 1989, I saw a front desk interaction, and I was getting my master's in psychology at the time. And the interaction bugged me so much, I thought, why is it some people are great with customers and other people stink? I mean, I didn't use that language exactly in my head, but I thought, you're a smart person who's getting all this credentialing in psychology, you got to build something to help hotels and restaurants figure that out. And we have clients today who can't live without this survey. It's saved their business, I am proud to say. But I'm conflicted because I don't know which direction to go in next, and I get just as much pressure from a certain group that says, no, you need more restaurants and hotels, and others who say, no way, you're going to be talking to big houses like Talent Reef and selling this.
So what's your vision?
My vision was directly helping the client. The name of the company is Rave-worthy because my mission is to make my clients rave-worthy. I want their customers to rave
Be
about
raving
them.
fans, right?
Yep. And so that was my vision.
Okay. Well, the answer's in there. You just have to figure out.
So here, you're new to Lean Startup, so you haven't used any
I'm
of
brand new.
the applications. So it seems to me that if you engage yourself in the process, you'll find a more comforting solution. John?
I was going to bring up an example of the intuitive versus the
Manufacturers.
manufactured.
You can probably come up with better
Yeah.
words than that.
When you mentioned the manufactured sort of vision, it was, for profit. You hear about a lot of college students, I'm going to write an app and sell it for $5.99 on the web. Generate some quick money, and then go on to the next one. So really it's building it for that, as opposed to I'm passionate about customer service and figuring out why some people suck and some people don't. And
Yep, that was the question.
I'm curious, and there's the clear difference. She's been 1989 is when that intuitive vision happened. So she hasn't given up for
Question in
a
the back.
good while.
Can you talk a little bit more about your validation process? In the Lean Startup, it talks about trying to avoid vanity metrics and trying to observe behavior versus just using surveys. So what would that look like for?
Well, the book was written. I mean, his experience is in software. So doing on an SAS model, you're really far removed from your customer, and it's really easy to come to the wrong conclusions. My personal experience, I was standing with a grill, giving somebody food, watching their facial expressions when they ate it, and then and most of the time they say, wow, that was the most incredible thing I've eaten in 30 years. All right, great. I learned a lot, and I'm right there with my customer. I know that I'm getting this dialed in. You don't have that in an SAS model, so you really have to work diligently to not believe what you want to believe, because everybody wants to believe. The pressure to believe that your value proposition really works is powerful. And if the customer's not right there, then you've got to be extra diligent to make absolutely sure. And so thus the vanity metrics. With an SAS model, you can come up with metrics that don't actually measure the customer's engagement. Page visits is an example.
It's a quick two-part question regarding your personal background. Was there ever a point where you decided you should pivot with your experience in the meat industry, because you couldn't control, the taste? You said sometimes it tasted bad, sometimes it tasted good. Was there a point where you said, hey, let's pivot, maybe make it into pet food or something like that, because the profit margins are huge, or let's pivot and sell it internationally, because American meat has, people look at it at a higher quality.
Right. I tried all those exact pivots, and none worked. So they all ended up being distractions. I wasted a lot of money thinking that I needed to pivot when what I really needed to do was to remain relentlessly focused on that one question. And this is why my answer to you is, what's your vision? That will give you the answer. My vision wasn't to create pet food. My vision wasn't to ship grass-fed beef to Japan. My vision was to create the best eating experience possible for customers in the upper Midwest, to create a market for family farm and raised livestock, and to fundamentally change the welfare of the cattle and create a viable economic alternative to the feedlot model. And all the things I tried that intellectually made sense to do failed. And it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that I threw away. And if I would have simply gone back to said, I have one sentence that's my passion. Does this move me closer to my passion? The answer was no to every one of those things.
Okay.
Good question.
My second. Sorry.
Go ahead.
You said another one of the issues was as well that you noticed later on was that you were doing kind of a B2B2C model, where you had like a gatekeeper who wouldn't let you in and you couldn't get in.
I was B2B. My value proposition was B2C. My business was B2B, and that was a major fatal flaw.
Did you ever figure out how to go B2C directly or
no?
online?
Because the logistical challenges for going B2C. Now I've got to sell you frozen meat in bulk and make you come and get it, and that's a deal killer. That the percentage of the marketplace that would buy their meat that way is very small. So to get the scale I wanted, I had to be selling it fresh through the grocery stores, but ultimately, I didn't iterate that well enough.
Okay. One of your models was idea, prototype, MVP, and then scale. What's the role of a prototype in the various companies you work with?
I don't know, because I made that one up just to fool everybody, actually. So a prototype would be an early stage MVP that hasn't actually been released to the full market yet. So
can that validate anything though?
You can. You can. Sure, it can. Mostly, what it validates is, can we even build this? Prototyping the purpose of prototyping is to determine internally, can we produce this? And once an MVP is designed to get external validation, to say, we know we can make this. Now, is this a compelling solution to solve a problem?
Have you ever invested in a prototype stage company?
I haven't, but it all depends on on how compelling it is.
He's not a pre-revenue investor, so.
No, we haven't done right.
And so, is prototyping, would that also be considered like an app that's in beta? Is that prototyping?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sure. Good question. I've never thought about that before.
Are you done with your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, is there a hard limit on the amount of money you need to think about? Can you put a hard limit on how much you spend on validating the idea? on the very initial stage?
A hard limit.
No, no, not necessarily, but if you want $1 million to validate it, then you better be able to prove to me that the market size is really large, and that if it validates, you're going to be able to go up that scale from 0 to 1% really quickly, because there's a lot more risk, there's more capital required to validate it. So the return on the backside of the validation, if it's successful, has to be greater than average.
Can I create a little learning opportunity from you, Stephen? So what I'd like to know, just for the group's benefit, you didn't make any reference to the Canvas.
I did not. I've been through the Canvas process, and I didn't think it was as useful as other people.
So, but for the group who is just on the surface with Lean Startup, how does the Canvas process work, and how would it apply, if you could, to what he was doing, or what solutions can a Canvas process?
Well, first of all, Todd mentioned the two elements of the Canvas that are absolutely highest priority. You know, who is your customer?
Right.
What are their needs? What are their pains? What are their gains? What gains are they looking for? And what's your value proposition? How are you delivering value? What products or services or ways of allowing these customers to achieve those gains? I mean, those are the two most important elements of the business model canvas. There are other elements of the business model canvas that are can add innovation, like what partners do you use and what pricing models do you have, et cetera. But you touched on the most important two.
Did we tell you you're the next speaker?
Yeah.
Next time. Give your.
I'll memorize. I got this. I need a deck.
That's a really great point. And I didn't know this until you just said it. Here's what I don't like about the Canvas. It comes out of the Stanford Design School, and it's artsy. I'm not an art guy. And so the process was obviously designed by people who like to make stuff out of pipe cleaners and like to draw a lot of pictures. And that's not me. So I'm going through the exact same steps, but I don't like that process because I'm not an artist. So maybe that's probably the only thing I really have against it.
Right. Well, very good. Another hand.
I did want to say one thing. We've had several different viewers come in and out of the Hangout. So in the future, these are going to be Hangouts on air on Google. We've done 2 already. If you can't make future presentations, this is always going to be an option where you can ask questions of the presenter through this. We didn't have anybody ask questions today, but I would encourage you in the future, if you can't make the meeting and you can make the Hangout on air, that's always an option for you as well.
Okay.
Oh, and I should say that for those on the Google Hangout, you can find me on LinkedIn at Todd Churchill, CFO Insights.
I tell you what, for that, I mean, this is still live. For that, we can actually add that into the event, and we'll put your contact information there.
And for those who don't know about Google Hangout, because we're on Hangout, it automatically goes to YouTube, so you can then review this again on YouTube. So,
yep.
Okay, so the next part of our deal, our agenda, is the fact that we like to know who you are, and we also